Greetings to all my loyal followers and first-time visitors. Today, we're once again stepping into the magical world where everything seems perfect. But even fairy tales have their flaws. As beloved as the Harry Potter saga is, J.K. Rowling has admitted over the years that not all of her plot decisions were perfect. There are moments she would go back and change, if only she could. Let's take a closer look at what she regrets the most. Number 1. Bulldog's kind-hearted but wrongfully portrayed. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry encounters Aunt Marge and her pack of fierce bulldogs. One of them even chases him up a tree. It made for a vivid scene, but as Rowling later admitted, it was far from accurate. At the time of writing the book, she knew very little about the breed. In reality, English bulldogs are not aggressive monsters, but calm, gentle, and loyal companions. After the book was released, Rowling publicly apologized to bulldog owners and readers who may have been misled. Number 2. Dobby, the elf who broke our hearts. When Dobby first appeared in the Chamber of Secrets, he came across as irritating and odd, but by the end of the saga, he had become one of the most beloved characters, fiercely loyal, brave, and full of unexpected strength. It was Dobby who helped Harry and his friends escape Malfoy Manor. And it was Dobby who died saving them. Bellatrix's dagger proved fatal. Rowling later confessed that killing him was incredibly painful. She regretted it, but as a true storyteller, knew that the moment carried essential emotional weight. Without it, something vital would have been missing. Number 3. Severus Snape, dead, but forever legendary. By the end of the saga, Rowling seemed to be channeling her inner George R.R. Martin. Within just a few chapters, we lost Mad-Eye Moody, Remus Lupin, Tonks, Fred Weasley, Eddie, and of course Severus Snape. Snape's fate struck a particularly strong chord with readers. Some hated him, others adored him, but everyone agreed he wasn't who he appeared to be. His death became one of the most powerful, heart-wrenching moments of the entire story. Rowling later apologized to fans for killing him off, and among readers a theory spread like wildfire. Snape, being a potions master, could have faked his death and disappeared. Perhaps he's still out there, far from war, finally at peace. Number 4. Ron and Hermione, meant to be, or a mismatch. While Harry and Ginny's relationship unfolded logically, through struggles, separation, and genuine emotion, Ron and Hermione's romance left many readers puzzled. Yes, there were hints, especially in the Goblet of Fire, but few truly believed they would end up together. After the final book was released, Rowling received a flood of letters and comments. Many questioned whether Ron and Hermione could realistically last even a year, let alone the 19 shown in the epilogue. Rowling eventually admitted she had doubts too, and maybe, just maybe, made a mistake. Interestingly, the actors agreed. Emma Watson supported Rowling's reflections, and Rupert Grint even joked that his Ron would probably be living alone in a small apartment, unemployed. Number 5. The epilogue 19 years later, or never at all. The scene where Harry, Ron, and Hermione send their own children off to Hogwarts became a symbolic ending. The story had started with a train, and it ended with one too. But even here, Rowling had second thoughts. She originally envisioned a different ending, a graduation scene, where the trio says goodbye to their school, celebrates the end of their childhood, and looks ahead to the future. But after the emotional climax of the Battle of Hogwarts, she felt that wouldn't quite fit. The epilogue was meant as a quiet exhale, but not everyone was satisfied. Rowling later apologized to fans who were hoping for a different conclusion, and admitted that she herself still isn't sure it was the right way to end such an epic tale. Number 6. Fred Weasley's death. Fred Weasley died laughing. That's what made it worse. In the middle of a joke, in the middle of a battle, surrounded by family. 1 second he was smiling, the next, gone. The explosion hit before anyone could react, and just like that, the world lost its brightest spark. Fred wasn't just funny, he was fearless. Along with George, he opened a joke shop in the darkest time. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was more than a store, it was rebellion. Their pranks weren't childish, they were resistance. Whoopee cushions in wartime, laughter when everyone else was afraid. In Deathly Hallows, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Fred fights bravely, shoulder to shoulder with Percy, who had just returned to the family. They're joking, reconnecting. Percy cracks a line, Fred laughs, and the wall explodes, and that was the last thing he ever said. It felt cruel, too sudden, too final. Rowling later called it her hardest choice. It was the worst, she admitted. Killing Fred broke me. I did it because war takes the good ones too, but I still feel it. Readers never forgave her, not really, because Fred was more than a name on a page. He was joy, mischief, life. Number 7, Percy's role in the Ministry. Percy Weasley chose the Ministry over his family. He turned his back on Arthur and Molly, stopped writing, stopped visiting. Even when Voldemort returned, Percy stood by the official line. Harry was lying. Dumbledore was dangerous. The Ministry knew best. And his own family, they were just an embarrassment. In Order of the Phoenix, Percy sends Ron a cold, formal letter. I sincerely hope you're not allowing yourself to be influenced by the deluded beliefs of your brother and Mr. Potter. That wasn't just a warning, it was a betrayal. Percy wasn't confused, he was proud of siding with power. He wanted to rise. By Deathly Hallows, Percy returns, late, but he returns. He bursts into the room of requirement, dueling alongside his siblings. He jokes with Fred, fights beside him, and then Fred dies, right there, during a laugh. It's cruel. Percy screams, breaks down, but it's too late for reconciliation. Fans were torn. Some forgave him, others couldn't. Rowling admitted later she made Percy too flat, too rigid. She turned him into a symbol of blind loyalty, to rules, to authority, to ambition. In real life, she said, people like Percy often come back. They grow, they change. I should have shown that more clearly. Number 8. Scabbers and Peter Pettigrew. Scabbers slept in Ron's pocket, curled up in his bed, ate from his hand. For years he was just a lazy, scruffy rat, until he wasn't. In Prisoner of Azkaban we learn the truth. Scabbers was Peter Pettigrew, one of Voldemort's followers, a man who betrayed James and Lily Potter, who framed Sirius Black, who lived as a rat for 12 years. Fans were stunned, not by the twist, but by the logic. How could no one notice? Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not even Fred and George, who stole Marauder's map from Filch. The map shows every person in Hogwarts, every dot, every name. He's right there, Peter Pettigrew, Harry shouted in the book. But somehow no one saw him until the 3rd year. Hermione spent years with Scabbers, so did Harry. They brewed potions, slept in the same dorm, fought trolls. How did no one ever feel something was off? Pettigrew was a grown man, a Death Eater, living as a pet. It stretched the rules of the world too far. Rowling later admitted she had doubts. In an interview, she said the reveal was a bit theatrical, too dramatic, too convenient. I wanted that moment in the Shrieking Shack, she explained. But she agreed, it came at a cost to realism. Fans had a right to question it. The transformation scene was intense, the tension, the shock, Sirius yelling, Lupin trembling, Scabbers writhing in Ron's hands. Then bam! A man where a rat had been. It was cinematic, memorable, but it also felt like stage magic, the kind that leaves too many questions behind the curtain. Number 9, Remus and Tonksy, fate. Remus Lupin had survived everything. Greyback's bite, years of isolation, a war, and then another. He found love with Tonks. They had a child, Teddy. It should have been a beginning. Instead, it was the end. In Deathly Hallows, their deaths are announced almost casually. No last stand, no farewell, just a line from a battle report. Remus Lupin dead, Nymphadora Tonks dead. That's all Harry hears. The next time we see them, they're lying side by side in the Great Hall, cold, silent, gone. Their story was never easy. Lupin believed he didn't deserve Tonks. He tried to leave. She refused. "You see," she shouted at him in Half-Blood Prince, "you see what you've been doing? You've been letting the prejudice against werewolves dictate your life." And yet, just when they found courage, just when they found each other, they were taken away. J.K. Rowling later confessed she regretted that choice. "I didn't need to kill them," she said. "I did it for balance, for symmetry." Harry had survived with no parents. Teddy would too, another orphan of war. But fans were devastated. Remus had already lost James, Sirius, Dumbledore. Now he lost everything else. Tonks had only just become a mother. She was fierce, clumsy, brave. She changed her hair color with her mood. She lit up dark rooms. Her last act? Rushing into battle to find Remus and dying before she could ever hold Teddy again. Their deaths were meant to echo the past, to show war doesn't spare the good, but some wounds never heal. Remus and Tonks deserved peace, a future, a family. All they got was a line in a book and a name on a page, number 10, Neville's forgotten parents. Neville, Longbottom, was never meant to be a hero. At least that's how it seemed at first. Shy, clumsy, forgetful, always losing his toad. But behind that awkward smile was a boy with a tragedy deeper than most realized. A boy whose parents were tortured into madness. A boy who visited them in silence, while others visited graves. In Order of the Phoenix, we get one glimpse, one moment. Harry sees Neville in St. Mungo's hospital. Alice Longbottom, pale and hollow-eyed, presses a candy wrapper into her son's hand. Neville takes it, smiles. "Thanks, Mum." That's it. No tears, no screams, just quiet, unbearable love. It's one of the saddest scenes in the series, and yet never mentioned again. Frank and Alice Longbottom were auras, war heroes, members of the original Order of the Phoenix. They fought alongside Moody, Lupin, and the Potters. Bellatrix Lestrange cursed them with the Cruciatus so long and so cruelly they lost their minds. "They are insane," says Dumbledore, "irreparably so. But their story remains in the shadows, their bravery forgotten." J.K. Rowling later admitted she regretted that. She said Neville's parents deserved more, that their suffering was just as real as James and Lily's, maybe worse, because they're still alive, but gone, stuck in a silent prison, a punishment without end. And for Neville, that pain shaped everything. Fans kept asking, what were Frank and Alice like before? How did Neville feel growing up with this silent sorrow? He didn't wear it like Harry did. He didn't talk about it. He just carried it, quietly. And when he stood up to Voldemort in the final battle, he wasn't just fighting for Hogwarts. He was fighting for them. Number 11, Hedwig's death. She was more than a pet, more than a bird. Hedwig was Harry's very first friend in the wizarding world, his first birthday gift, his first sign that life could be different. He met her in Diagon Alley, bought with Hagrid's gold, before he even knew how to hold a wand. And from that moment on, she was always there, proud, silent, watching. She flew through every year with him, carried his letters, waited for him at night, nipped him when he was being stupid. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry ran away from the Dursleys, Hedwig kept him company at the Leaky Cauldron. She didn't speak, but she understood. She gave an affectionate hoot as he stroked her feathers. In a world full of lies, betrayals, and death, Hedwig was constant. Then came the Deathly Hallows, the sky battle, 7 Potters, chaos in the air, spells flying, people shouting, and then one green flash, a scream. The owl screeched and fell to the bottom of the cage. Just like that, gone. No warning, no time to say goodbye. The only creature who had been with Harry since the beginning, dead in a single sentence. Fans were stunned. Some cried more for Hedwig than for Dobby. She was innocent, pure. She never asked for anything. Her death felt cruel, sudden, wrong, not heroic, not meaningful, just gone. Many readers called it one of the most heartbreaking moments in the series, Because it wasn't just about an owl, it was about everything Harry had to lose. J.K. Rowling later explained why she did it. The loss of Hedwig represented a loss of innocence, she wrote. She wanted to show that Harry's childhood was over, that nothing would protect him now, but even she admitted it was painful. "I'm sorry about Hedwig," she said. "I still get upset thinking about it." Number 12. Harry and Ginny's relationship. Harry Potter married Ginny Weasley. They had 3 kids, but many fans were stunned. The romance felt sudden. There were barely any slow, tender moments, no deep talks, no long stares. Then, out of the blue, in Half-Blood Prince, Harry kisses her. Without thinking, without planning it, without worrying about the fact that 50 people were watching, Harry kissed her. Just like that. No warning, no real build-up. Readers expected more. Ginny was always in the background. In earlier books, she was the shy little sister. Then suddenly she's bold, funny, and dating half of Hogwarts. Harry starts noticing her only after other boys do. It didn't feel natural. It felt scripted, too convenient, like the story needed a romance, and this was the nearest option. The films didn't help. Movie Ginny was barely there, quiet, awkward, no fire, no wit. In the books, she was fierce. She called Fleur phlegm. She hexed boys in the hallways. She joked like Fred and George. She was a Weasley through and through, but none of that made it to the screen. So when Harry kissed her, many viewers asked, why her? Even Rowling had doubts. Years later, she admitted it. In an interview with Wonderland, she said, "I wrote the Hermione-Ron relationship as a form of wish fulfillment." She hinted that Harry and Hermione made more sense, that the story didn't follow logic, it followed her personal feelings. Fans reacted fast. Some were furious, others relieved. For many, the love story always felt off, too quiet, too forced. A final kiss before the epilogue, but no real journey, no reason to believe it would last forever. Number 13. Underdeveloped Death Eaters. They were the shadows behind the throne, the silent sentinels of fear, cloaked not just in black robes but in the unwavering devotion to a cause few truly understood. The Death Eaters, Voldemort's most loyal followers, emerged in the series as terrifying symbols of absolute allegiance to darkness. But as the final battle faded into legend, many readers were left with an uncomfortable void. Why had they followed him? What twisted roots had taken hold of their souls, binding them to a man who killed without mercy and ruled through fear? Take Rookwood, for instance, Augustus Rookwood, a spy embedded within the Department of Mysteries. We are told of his arrest in Goblet of Fire after being named by Karkaroff during his trial. Yet what led this unspeakable to betray the very institution he served? Did he seek power, revenge, ideological kinship with Voldemort's vision? We never find out. His motives, like so many others, are swept into the ever-growing pile of untold tales. Rowling herself admitted in an interview with Leaky Cauldron that she did not have the page space to dive into the personal histories of each Death Eater. They had backstories, she said, but the central arc was Harry's. It was a sacrifice. And sacrifice it was, and of nuance, of complexity, of characters who might have turned the war into more than a battle of light and dark. Nowhere is this more painfully evident than in the case of the Lestrange brothers. Rodolphus and Rabastan Lestrange, names whispered in courtrooms, etched in the minds of survivors. We meet them as convicted torturers of the Longbottoms, their hands painted red with Cruciatus-induced madness. But beyond that, silence. In Order of the Phoenix, Bellatrix commands the stage as a madwoman. Rodolphus stands beside her like a silent echo. Rabastan, barely seen, is a name without a face. Were they born cruel? Or were they made so by war, by ideology, by something far more intimate? In truth, the Lestranges could have been Rowling's most fertile ground. The pure blood mania, the obsession with lineage, the corrupted nobility of their house, all ingredients for a Shakespearean tragedy. Imagine Rodolphus, once a proud scion of an ancient house, marrying Bellatrix in a cold union of politics. Imagine the growing distance, the way Bellatrix gazed only at the Dark Lord, never him. Wouldn't bitterness fester in that silence? Wouldn't loyalty turn to madness? "I am not ashamed," Bellatrix cries in Order of the Phoenix during her trial, her voice ringing with ferocity. "I would do it again." Rodolphus says nothing. His silence is chilling, but what does it mean? Is it stoic pride, resigned despair? Without Rowling's insight, we are left to guess, and in that guessing, the character remains hollow. Then there is Elector Caro, who becomes deputy headmistress during Voldemort's reign over Hogwarts. Her cruelty is unmistakable. She teaches Muggle studies not to enlighten, but to indoctrinate. "Muggles are like animals, stupid and dirty," she snarls in Deathly Hallows. But what twisted her into this? Was it fear, family pressure, or genuine belief? Alecto, too, remains a silhouette, menacing but two-dimensional. Even within the Death Eater ranks there's hierarchy and depth hinted at, then dropped. Severus Snape, the most complex of them all, is the only one granted the layers of betrayal, regret, love, and sacrifice. But what of others like Mulciber, who specialized in the Imperious Curse? He's described in Prisoner of Azkaban as someone who tried to force people to do horrific things. What horrors, and why? Was he a sadist or a soldier following orders? The simplification becomes more troubling when you consider that some Death Eaters didn't just follow Voldemort, they believed in him, they were not brainwashed, they made a choice, but the books rarely stop to explore what that choice meant for them. Take Antonin Dolohov, a man feared for the murder of Gideon and Fabian Pruett. When he duels in Order of the Phoenix, there's no insight into his mind, only the blast of his curse. Did he feel pride, regret, hatred? We will never know. Some of the most chilling Death Eaters had the potential to become unforgettable villains, not because of how evil they were, but because of how human they might have been. Evan Rosier, for example, was known to be part of Voldemort's inner circle before the First War ended. He died resisting arrest, blasting off part of Mad-Eye Moody's nose in the process. What drove him to fight to the death rather than surrender? What haunted his final thoughts? All we have is his obituary in Dumbledore's war stories. Rowling's choice to use the Death Eaters as symbols, rather than people, was likely a narrative necessity. She had to keep the story focused, the stakes clear. But in doing so, she reduced a rich gallery of antagonists to caricatures. They sneer, they kill, they brandish the dark mark, but they do not bleed, they do not cry, and they do not reflect. Contrast this with characters like Regulus Black. He'd once a Death Eater, later a tragic hero. His arc, though brief, shows what could have been. In Deathly Hallows, Harry finds his letter to the Dark Lord, signed R.A.B. In it, Regulus confesses that he discovered Voldemort's obsession with immortality and chose to destroy the Horcrux, knowing it would cost him his life. Here, finally, we see a Death Eater not as a monster, but as a young man caught between duty and morality. Draco Malfoy, too, dances on the edge. "I have to do this," he tells Dumbledore, his wand shaking, his voice trembling. His journey is one of survival, not cruelty. He is no murderer. And yet for every Draco there are 10 Thorfinn rules, strong, silent, soulless. If we had seen Rabastan before Azkaban, a boy at Hogwarts, proud, arrogant, perhaps terrified of disappointing his family, might we have understood his descent? If Rodolphus had spoken even once of Bellatrix's madness, of his own fading identity, would we not see a man, not just a monster? Number 14, Colin Creevey's death. Of all the names etched into the heartbreak of the Battle of Hogwarts, one of the most tender, the most gut-wrenchingly human, is that of Colin Creevey, the wide-eyed boy with the camera who, from the moment he stepped foot into Hogwarts, believed in the magic of people as much as the magic of spells. He wasn't famous, he wasn't powerful, and he certainly wasn't expected to die a hero, but he did, and in doing so Colin became a silent echo of bravery, often overlooked, yet deeply unforgettable. We first meet Colin in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a Muggle-born first year who instantly idolizes Harry Potter. All those people, your mum and dad and everyone, thought you were going to die, but you didn't, and that's why you're famous, Colin tells Harry, his voice filled not with envy, but with wonder. He was irritating, yes, but only in the way that someone too earnest can be. He snapped photos endlessly, hoping to capture even a flicker of the magic he felt. He sent them home to his father, the milkman. To Colin, Hogwarts wasn't just a school, it was a dream he could barely believe he was allowed to live. His enthusiasm was often met with annoyance. Harry found him exhausting, Ron rolled his eyes, and Draco Malfoy sneered at his excitement. But Colin never wavered. He didn't want popularity or recognition. He just wanted to be part of something larger than himself. He wanted to belong. In that sense, Colin's story is every bit as universal as Harry's. He was the boy who marveled at wonder, even when others told him to calm down. He held tight to his innocence in a world that was unraveling, one shadow at a time. What's often forgotten is that Colin was one of the few Muggle-borns who returned to Hogwarts during times of open hostility. After Voldemort seized power and the Ministry began hunting Muggle-born witches and wizards, Colin was forced into hiding. Yet when the call came to defend Hogwarts, he came back, illegally, secretly. He was underage, barred from fighting, but he returned anyway. He slipped past the protective enchantments, joined the resistance, and put his life on the line, not out of obligation, but out of sheer, blinding courage. When Harry finds his body in Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes Colin Creevey, though underage, had sneaked back into the castle and had been killed in the battle. There is no fanfare. No thunderous declaration, just one small, dead boy on the floor of the Great Hall, a boy who wanted to take pictures of heroes, only to become one himself. That image is haunting in its simplicity. Colin fallen, nameless in the chaos, as others cried and screamed around him. But Harry notices. Harry kneels. He remembers. Dennis Creevey, Colin's younger brother, was never seen again in the series after the battle. It is unclear how he bore the loss of his sibling, the same boy who had carried him into Hogwarts with delight. They had been so close, Dennis too had fallen into the lake on his first night, only to emerge, laughing, soaked, and eager to join Colin in adventure. That bond, though never central in the books, hinted at a familial closeness that was torn apart by war. Rowling never wrote a scene about Dennis grieving, but the silence screams louder than any passage. In an interview years later, J.K. Rowling confessed that writing Colin's death devastated her. "He was so pure," she said, "and I never wanted him to die. But the war had to hurt." She explained that Colin's death, among others, was meant to symbolize the true cost of resistance, that not only seasoned fighters fall, but the wide-eyed, kind-hearted believers too. His death underlined the tragedy. Not everyone who should have lived gets to. It's easy to focus on the grand names, Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and even Severus Snape. They were larger than life, their stories woven into the epic threads of the plot. But Colin's death was different. It didn't serve a narrative arc. It didn't complete a destiny. It was random, brutal, real. He died because he believed in something, and because the world he entered as a curious child was no longer the one that welcomed him. Perhaps that's what makes Colin's story so poignant. He had no prophecy, no secret power, no chosen path. He was, as Dumbledore once said of another Muggle-born, remarkable simply for being who he was. He was the kind of person who would run into battle not because he had to, but because he thought it was right. There is no statue of Colin in the courtyard, no portraits hang in his memory, but he is the boy who represents all the unnamed heroes, the ones who died quietly, bravely and without regret. Harry, who watched friends die and enemies fall, likely never forgot Colin. How could he? In a world where he was constantly used as a symbol, Colin was the first person to see him as just Harry, a boy, not a legend. That simple, unwavering faith left a mark. In those early days when Harry struggled with the burden of fame, Colin didn't want anything from him but a picture. Not for money, not for fame, just for memory. He saw Harry through the eyes of admiration, not manipulation. Years later, Rowling expressed regret. "I wish I had let Colin grow up," she said in a 2016 reflection. "He deserved that. He deserved a chance to become someone great. But in many ways, Colin was already great. Greatness doesn't always come with age, accolades, or recognition. Sometimes it lies in the bravery of stepping forward when everyone tells you to stay behind. Sometimes it's choosing to act in spite of fear, and that is exactly what Colin did." Number 15. The Forgotten Hogwarts Students. In the great halls of Hogwarts, where portraits whispered and staircases moved of their own accord, not all students basked in the spotlight. The tale, we were told, followed a boy with a lightning-shaped scar, flanked by his two brave companions. But as they chased Horcruxes and faced Dark Lords, dozens of other lives swirled in the same castle walls, lives of students who learned the same spells, walked the same corridors, and fought the same war. And yet, their stories remained in the shadows. Take Dean Thomas, for example. Tall, soft-spoken, and with a love for West Ham football, Dean was more than just the other Gryffindor boy in Harry's dormitory. He was loyal, brave, and politically aware. His Muggle background gave him a unique lens through which he saw the wizarding world. During the Second Wizarding War, Dean went on the run, targeted for his blood status. He lived in hiding, hunted and hungry, away from friends, family, and school. He was even imprisoned by snatchers and witnessed firsthand the horror of Voldemort's new regime. And yet, his story never earned more than a passing paragraph. What courage it must have taken to survive without a wand, without protection. What scars he must have carried home. And what became of Dean after the war, we never truly learn. Then there's Lee Jordan, whose voice once boomed across the Quidditch pitch, peppered with jokes and biased commentary that made Professor McGonagall purse her lips. His energy was infectious, his friendship with Fred and George a pure firework of teenage rebellion. But Lee was more than comic relief. When the world darkened, he didn't retreat into silence. He fought back. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione were away, Lee used underground radio to resist the Ministry's lies. Potterwatch, it was called, a beacon of hope crackling through static. "This is River," he'd say, using a code name. He risked everything to tell the truth, to remind people that Harry was still fighting, that all was not lost. And yet even his defiant voice faded after the final battle. Did Lee become a journalist? A revolutionary? Did he return to Hogwarts or chart a different course? The silence surrounding students like Dean and Lee is not accidental. J.K. Rowling herself acknowledged the imbalance. In a candid interview, she once said, "I do regret not spending more time on the other houses. I became so focused on Gryffindor and Slytherin I didn't do justice to Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, and there were many students whose stories I wish I'd had time to tell." Nowhere is that more apparent than in the forgotten corners of Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. How little we truly know of their dormitories, their traditions, their students' dreams. Hufflepuff was often mocked, loyal and kind, but seen as the leftovers of Hogwarts sorting. Yet Cedric Diggory, its champion, was perhaps the noblest of them all. When Harry and Cedric both grasped the Triwizard Cup, it was Cedric who insisted they take it together. It was Cedric who showed fairness, not rivalry, and it was Cedric who died for it. After Cedric's death, the spotlight moved on, but the Hufflepuffs remained. Did they grieve as a house? Did Ernie Macmillan speak at Cedric's memorial? Did Hannah Abbott organise vigils or write angry letters to the Prophet? She would later marry Neville Longbottom and run the Leaky Cauldron, but in the pages of the books she is but a name on a list. Susan Bones, whose entire family was murdered by Death Eaters, attended classes, passed exams, and held her head high. What resilience lived in her bones. Ravenclaw, too, was reduced to clichés: wit, learning, cleverness. But what of the people behind the traits? Luna Lovegood, dreamy and mocked, was the exception, the one Ravenclaw we came to know deeply. She saw things others didn't, not just thestrals, but truths hidden in silence. "You're just as sane as I am," she told Harry with a smile. But what of Padma Patil, who stood beside Ron at the Yule Ball, ignored and bored? She was a twin, a sister, a student, and a fighter in the Battle of Hogwarts. Was she brave, or just overlooked? And then there was Terry Boot, who joined Dumbledore's army, Michael Corner, who dated both Ginny and Cho and dual Death Eaters, Anthony Goldstein, one of the few Jewish students we ever heard about, mentioned only once in passing. These were not just classmates, they were soldiers, survivors. Each had their own war. The issue is not that they were forgotten, it's that they were never truly seen. Even in the final battle, when all students took up arms, the camera lingered only on the usual faces. Neville with the sword, Molly with the curse, Harry, of course, at the centre. But what of Megan Jones or Morag McDougal? Names that flutter past, unanchored by story. Even within Gryffindor itself, the imbalance was clear. Parvati Patil, twin of Padma, was more than a pretty girl with bangles. She was in divination class with Harry. She feared the centaurs. She fought at the Department of Mysteries. Lavender Brown, often ridiculed for her crushes and giggles, died in the war. Bitten by Fenrir Greyback, her body was found, broken and unmoving. A girl who once laughed too loud was silenced forever, but her death too passed quickly, like so many others, unspoken. It raises the question, what is it to be a student at Hogwarts when your story isn't chosen, when the narrative moves around you but never toward you? We were told the tale of a chosen boy, but what of the unchosen many, the ones who studied in quiet corners, who failed their OWLs, who had heartbreaks and victories unknown? Joanne Rowling built a world vast and beautiful, but even she admitted that the focus was narrow. "I regret that the other houses didn't get their moment," she said. "There were so many characters whose stories I could have told." Imagine the novels told from the eyes of Zachariah Smith, the skeptical Hufflepuff who questioned Harry in every meeting. Was he a coward or a realist? He fled the battle, but what did he feel the next day? Shame? Relief? And what became of him in the piece that followed? Number 16, Sirius Black's Lack of Funeral. Of all the losses Harry Potter endured, the death of Sirius Black remains one of the most heartbreaking and, strangely, one of the least acknowledged, not because the readers didn't mourn, but because the wizarding world itself seemed to move on far too quickly. Sirius, the man who broke free of Azkaban, the wrongly accused godfather, the rebellious marauder, vanished behind the veil in the Department of Mysteries. And that was it. No funeral, no memorial, no shared grief from the characters who should have wept. Just absence. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius's death is a moment of pure devastation. As he duels his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange, he's still grinning. "Come on, you can do better than that," he taunts. And then, with one flick of her wand, he's gone. The text reads, "He was falling through the ragged veil hanging from the arch, and Harry saw the look of mingled fear and surprise on his godfather's wasted, once handsome face as he fell through the ancient doorway and disappeared behind the veil, which fluttered for a moment as though in a high wind, and then fell back into place." That's all. There's no recovery of the body, no chance for Harry to touch him, hold him, say goodbye. The veil claims Sirius completely, both physically and narratively. What follows is silence, and that silence becomes a gaping hole in the emotional landscape of the story. Readers turned page after page, waiting for the moment someone, anyone, would light a candle, whisper a memory, speak his name with reverence. But it never came. This absence is all the more jarring when you consider who Sirius was. He wasn't just another member of the Order, he wasn't just a fugitive. He was Harry's godfather, the only link to James and Lily Potter that still lived and breathed. Their reunion in The Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the most emotionally charged scenes in the entire series. "I don't care," Harry shouts. "I'll go and live with him." For a moment, there's hope. Harry, so alone for so long, finally has someone to call family. And yet that fragile promise never gets fulfilled. Sirius is forced into hiding. He becomes a prisoner again, this time inside number 12, Grimmauld Place. Still, his relationship with Harry deepens. He sends letters, offers advice, fights beside him in the Department of Mysteries, but the final act is cruel. Sirius dies not as a hero in battle, but as a man distracted, laughing, seconds away from being pulled into nothingness. J.K. Rowling herself admitted that Sirius's lack of a funeral was an oversight. In interviews, she's said that the pacing of the plot took over, the urgency of the coming war, the emotional collapse of Harry, it all swept the moment away. But was that enough to excuse the absence? Fans didn't think so. Discussion boards flooded with disbelief. How could they just move on? Some asked. Wouldn't Lupin say something? Wouldn't Dumbledore honour him? Remus Lupin, perhaps more than anyone, should have held a moment for Sirius. They were brothers in arms, the last marauders left. Remus lost James, Peter betrayed them, and Sirius was the only one who truly remained. And yet, not once do we see him stop to mourn properly. In Half-Blood Prince, the Order regroups. Life continues. Remus infiltrates werewolf communities. Dumbledore gives cryptic speeches, but no one says, "We lost Sirius. Let's remember him." Even Dumbledore, the master of speeches and commemorations, remains silent. When Cedric Diggory dies in Goblet of Fire, a whole ceremony is dedicated to him. The school gathers. Dumbledore speaks with passion. Remember Cedric. Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy, remember what happened to a boy who was good and kind and brave. For Sirius there is nothing. This silence becomes deafening in Deathly Hallows. As the war escalates and more lives are lost, we see memorials. We hear the names. Dobby, the free elf, is buried by hand with respect and love. Harry even carves a headstone. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. But for Sirius Black, there is no grave, no stone, no word spoken aloud. The injustice of this erasure hits hardest when we remember how much Sirius meant to Harry. In the aftermath of his death, Harry spirals. He smashes Dumbledore's possessions in a fit of rage. He shouts, "He's gone!" And Dumbledore for once doesn't correct him. He doesn't say he's in a better place. He simply stands there, eyes filled with sorrow. Sirius's absence at his own farewell becomes symbolic of how the wizarding world often fails to honour its fallen. The veil in the Department of Mysteries swallows more than bodies. It swallows memory. The Ministry doesn't acknowledge Sirius's innocence until long after his death. The Daily Prophet doesn't print his obituary, and Harry, left to grieve alone, never even visits the Arch again. But it didn't have to be this way. Imagine a different version of Half-Blood Prince. One where the Order gathers at Grimmauld Place, where Remus, Tonks, and even Kreacher, who later comes to honour his master, stand in mourning. Where Harry is given a moment to speak, to say, "He wasn't perfect, but he loved me, he tried." Imagine a scene where the Marauders are remembered, not just for the mischief, but for their brotherhood. Even Kreacher's transformation in Deathly Hallows hints at this lost opportunity. At first, the house elf hates Sirius, who treated him with disdain, but later, Kreacher changes. He fights for Harry, he defends the cause. What if that arc had been mirrored in the way the characters remembered Sirius? What if they had come together to say, "We didn't understand him, but he fought for us, and he died for us"? The absence of a funeral feels particularly unjust when we recall that Sirius was never honored in life either. He spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit. He was hunted, hated, misunderstood. His own family disowned him. The Black family tapestry at Grimmauld Place shows a scorch mark where his name once was, as if his life had never existed. And so when he dies, it's as though the world continues that erasure. No portrait appears at Hogwarts, no chapter title bears his name. His face vanishes not just from the veil, but from the narrative. For a character so rich, so vibrant, so pivotal, this is a tragedy within a tragedy. One of the few times Sirius is mentioned after his death is in Deathly Hallows when Harry uses the Resurrection Stone. He sees Sirius again, along with James, Lily, and Remus. "You'll stay with me?" he asks. Sirius smiles. Until the very end. It's a brief, bittersweet moment, but it's not enough. It's a ghost, a shadow, a farewell, years too late. Rowling may have written herself into a corner. Plot demanded urgency, and the story was shifting gears toward war. But readers knew better. They knew that Sirius Black wasn't just a plot point. He was emotion, he was memory, he was family. Perhaps the most telling line comes not from the books, but from Rowling herself. In a rare interview, she said, "I do regret not giving Sirius a proper goodbye. He deserved it." That single admission speaks volumes. It validates the ache so many fans felt. It confirms that even in fiction we crave closure. Ultimately, Sirius's death without a funeral serves as a metaphor for all that he was denied in life: justice, freedom, family, recognition. He was the boy who ran from home, the man who clung to hope, and the friend who never stopped believing James would have trusted him. And in the end, the world let him slip away in silence. For readers, Sirius remains vivid not because of what the books gave him, but because of what they didn't. In fan fiction, readers write his funeral. In forums, they share memories. They create gravestones, tributes, imagined letters from Harry. They do what the story did not, they mourn. And perhaps that's the final lesson. Sometimes the real tribute comes not from the author's pen, but from the readers who refuse to forget. In the hearts of fans, Sirius Black walks again, not through a veil, but through memory, through love, through the words we whisper in his name. Until the very end. Number 17. The confusing Horcrux plot. In the shadows of the wizarding world, few creations are as cursed and complex as the Horcrux. Whispered in fear, wrapped in dark magic, and hidden in objects as common as a diary or as majestic as a goblet, the concept itself is horrifying, a part of a soul torn apart, ripped through murder, and sealed away. And yet for all the terror it evokes, the Horcrux storyline in Harry Potter stands as one of the most confusing and flawed elements in the entire saga. A brilliant idea tangled in narrative missteps. The first glimpse of a Horcrux, though unnamed at the time, came innocently enough in the Chamber of Secrets. Tom Riddle's diary seemed enchanted, interactive, and malevolent. It consumed Ginny Weasley, manipulated her, and nearly resurrected the Dark Lord. But what was it truly? At that moment, neither readers nor Harry himself understood. "The diary's been destroyed," Dumbledore said, "but if I'm not mistaken, it was a Horcrux." Half-Blood Prince. This offhand revelation comes 4 books later. That delay, however, cost more than narrative momentum. It created a storm of retroactive exposition. K. Rowling would later admit that she introduced the concept of Horcruxes far too late. "I held back too much," she confessed in an interview. "I didn't want to overwhelm readers with magical theory, but I underestimated their curiosity." That curiosity turned into confusion. By the time Horcruxes were fully explained in The Half-Blood Prince, the final battle against Voldemort was already taking shape. But the stakes were hazy and the rules, if any, seemed elusive. How are Horcruxes created? The books never tell us outright. We know murder is required, as it rips the soul apart, as Slughorn nervously confesses to young Tom Riddle in that foggy memory. By committing murder, killing rips the soul apart. The wizard intent upon creating a Horcrux would use the damage to his advantage. He would encase the torn portion, Half-Blood Prince. But the actual spell, the ritual, completely omitted. Rowling later stated in interviews that the spell is so vile, so wicked, that she didn't want to put it in a children's book. But in doing so, she left readers grappling with gaps. One of the most confounding examples is Harry himself. "You were the seventh Horcrux, Harry," Dumbledore tells him in Deathly Hallows, the Horcrux he never meant to make. The idea is poetic, tragic, and powerful. Harry, the boy marked by fate, literally carrying the enemy within. But how does that even work? Voldemort's soul, reduced to shards, finds a latch in Harry's body, but no spell was cast, no ritual, no object chosen. Was it mere proximity? Was Harry's status as a magical baby enough? These are the questions fans have debated for years. Worse still is Nagini, a snake, a living, breathing creature. How does that fit? Horcruxes were presented as objects, chosen for their value, their concealability. Dumbledore even says, "I think he wanted to make his final Horcrux out of something grand, something worthy of the magical number 7. Half-Blood Prince. A serpent hardly seems grand or safe. Yet Nagini houses a piece of Voldemort's soul. How? Why? No explanation ever comes in the books. Rowling explained later. He had a strange control over Nagini. It was a deep bond, but yes, it was a risk. A risk indeed, and a narrative stretch. Rowling's greatest regret, as she once shared during a Bloomsbury event, was the messiness of the Horcrux system. "I would redo it from scratch if I could. Too many assumptions, too much left unsaid." Fans were left to piece together fragments: the locket, the ring, the cup, the diadem, the diary, Nagini, and Harry. 7 pieces, but even the math is debated. Voldemort split his soul into 7 parts, not made 7 Horcruxes. 6 Horcruxes, and the remaining piece in himself, Dumbledore deduced, but by the time the story ends, it's unclear whether Voldemort's count remained intact or whether Harry's unplanned Horcrux threw it all off balance. And then there's the issue of destruction. Basilisk venom, fiend fire, and the sword of Gryffindor. These are the few things said to destroy Horcruxes, but even this is delivered in a patchwork of explanations. Hermione, the voice of reason, deduces that basilisk venom works because it destroys beyond magical repair. That's why Harry's destruction of the diary in Chamber of Secrets was unknowingly final. But how do they know the venom is still in the sword? How do they know Fiendfire will work, or that the cup is truly gone? The rules are unclear, the stakes are murky. Voldemort himself seems to forget the rules. In Deathly Hallows he kills Snape, wrongly believing Snape is the true master of the Elder Wand. He doesn't realize or care that murdering someone doesn't necessarily win allegiance from an artifact. He doesn't ask how a soul fragment might behave if the host is alive. If Voldemort is the architect of the Horcrux system, he should be its master. Instead, he feels like a character outpaced by his own magic. It's particularly painful because the concept should have been a masterpiece. The Horcruxes represent Voldemort's ultimate flaw, his fear of death, his inability to love, his arrogance. Each Horcrux is an echo of his fractured humanity. The diary manipulates innocence, the ring tempts with power and ancestry, the locket infects with despair, the cup ties him to the house of Hufflepuff which he despised, the diadem brilliance wasted, Nagini a predator, and Harry, the living embodiment of love ironically marked by hatred. Each item is rich with symbolism, but none fully explored. Readers feel this lack. When Ron destroys the locket in Deathly Hallows, it screams with visions and voices, mocking him, showing him Harry and Hermione kissing, playing on his fears. It's a powerful moment. "I have seen your heart, and it is mine," says the locket, but the cup, the diadem, the ring, Their destruction lacks the same emotional weight. They are dispatched quickly, functionally. The climax of Half-Blood Prince, where Dumbledore drinks the cursed potion to retrieve a fake locket, builds suspense, only to be revealed as a dead end, a misstep, a fake. One wonders why Rowling included it at all. The fake locket signed by R.A.B. creates another layer of confusion. Regulus Arcturus Black, a character mentioned once before. His tale, revealed through Creature and the past, is haunting. A young man who turned against Voldemort and died trying to undo the evil he helped enable. But his story, like so many others, is rushed. A footnote in the saga. His sacrifice barely acknowledged. Another missed opportunity. Perhaps the greatest confusion lies in how Voldemort senses or doesn't sense the destruction of his Horcruxes. Dumbledore says he never knew about the diary, which is absurd when one thinks about it. It was a full fragment of his soul, destroyed by a teenage boy. Shouldn't he have felt it? When the ring is shattered, when the cup is melted, does Voldemort's soul not scream? Rowling explained later that Voldemort was so unhinged, so fragmented, that he lost awareness. But again, it's an external explanation. The books never say this. This patchwork of logic becomes especially glaring in the final book. As Harry, Ron and Hermione race to find the last Horcruxes, the narrative lurches between exposition and action. "There is a Horcrux at Hogwarts," says Harry with sudden clarity. But how? Why? A dream? A gut feeling? The threads don't always connect. The climax, though thrilling, feels rushed. One minute they're breaking into Gringotts, the next they're dueling in the Great Hall. Horcruxes fall like dominoes. The issue isn't the idea, it's the handling. The Horcrux storyline could have been the beating heart of the saga's second half, a dark treasure hunt, a journey into the mind of a madman, a meditation on death and the price of immortality. But instead it's a jigsaw puzzle missing too many pieces. Fans fill the gaps with headcanons and theories, crafting explanations Rowling never provided. Some still defend the mystery. The vagueness is intentional, they argue. Dark magic is meant to be unknowable. And there's truth in that. Not all magic should be explained. But when the plot depends on understanding that magic, when survival hinges on the logic of Horcruxes, then the rules must be clear, or at least consistent. There are moments where the brilliance shines through. Dumbledore's hand blackened by the ring, Harry's decision to walk into the forest, sacrificing himself, the image of Voldemort's shredded soul in King's Cross, crying under a bench. These are powerful, unforgettable, but they are fragments, just like the Horcruxes themselves, a broken mirror reflecting genius and flaw alike. In the end, Rowling's regret is palpable. "I wish I had more time to expand that part," she once told a fan. "There's a lot I would do differently." The honesty is admirable, and perhaps the flaws make the series all the more human, like Harry himself, scarred, imperfect, and yet still victorious. But for many readers, the Horcrux storyline remains a lingering question mark, a tantalizing mystery that deserved more clarity, more weight. In a world so rich with detail, so bursting with magical laws and logic, the Horcruxes feel like the one thread left dangling. A dead end, perhaps, or maybe a door never fully opened. One can only wonder what the series would have looked like if the Horcruxes had been introduced earlier, if Tom Riddle's diary had been recognized for what it was from the start, if Dumbledore had begun his hunt in Goblet of Fire rather than waiting until Half-Blood Prince, if we had seen Voldemort create a Horcrux in real time, felt the soul rip, heard the incantation, witnessed the horror. Instead, we piece it together from echoes, from Slughorn's whispered fears, from a house elf's broken memories, from a snake's gaze and a boy's scar. And while that too has its beauty, it also has its blind spots. The Horcruxes were meant to explain Voldemort's survival. They ended up revealing something else entirely, the fragility of even the best stories when crucial truths are left untold. Number 18. Dumbledore's death. The night sky above the astronomy tower was painted in shadows and firelight, as if mourning the moment before it even happened. When Severus Snape raised his wand and uttered the fatal words, Avada Kedavra, a green light slashed through the air and struck Albus Dumbledore in the chest. For one breathless instant, time itself stood still, and then, slowly, silently, the greatest wizard of the age fell backward into the abyss. The murder of Albus Dumbledore was not just a dramatic high point of the sixth book, it was the moment everything changed. Hogwarts ceased to be a sanctuary, innocence died. Harry Potter stepped fully into adulthood. Joanne Rowling herself would later admit that this moment tore her apart as a writer. "It was the hardest death for me to write," she confessed in interviews. "I couldn't do it for a long time. I kept putting it off." Dumbledore was not merely a character, he was the compass, the anchor. He embodied hope and wisdom, and without him, the magical world seemed suddenly dimmer. For millions of readers, it was like losing a mentor or a beloved grandfather. Rowling admitted that for a time she doubted whether she should go through with it at all. But the narrative demanded it. Dumbledore's death was the price of truth. To win the war against Voldemort, Harry had to stand alone. No more hand-holding, no more riddles cloaked in metaphor. As Rowling explained later, if Dumbledore had lived, he would have taken over the final battle. Readers would never have seen Harry become the man he was meant to be. And yet, even as she defended her decision, she also apologized, sincerely, publicly. "I regret taking away the last adult who truly knew what was going on," she said. "Perhaps I could have given Harry a little more support." In many ways, Dumbledore's death was not just a plot twist, it was a sacrifice. From the very beginning of Half-Blood Prince, we are led into Dumbledore's world of secrets. We see the cracks in his invincible image, the withered hand, the pained silences, the decisions made in shadows, his alliance with Snape, his deep knowledge of Voldemort's Horcruxes, his refusal to tell Harry everything, all of it builds toward this one moment. He was dying anyway. The potion in the cave had taken the last of his strength, but Snape's spell ended it on Dumbledore's terms. It was a murder, but a planned one, a mercy and a message. In that moment, Snape's wand moved not with hatred, but with dread. Dumbledore had begged him, "Severus, please." But it was not a plea for life. It was a command to fulfill a promise. The ambiguity of those words, "please," haunted readers for years. Was he pleading for mercy or for death? Snape's own turmoil later confirmed the truth. Dumbledore had orchestrated his death. In a twisted echo of his life's philosophy, he chose death not as defeat, but as a way to empower others, to leave the final act of the war in the hands of those who must survive it. Still, readers asked, why that way? Why not let Dumbledore live to fight another day? Why not unleash his legendary power against Voldemort himself? Rowling later revealed that she wanted to explore what happens when a world loses its wisest protector. The point was not just that Harry would suffer, she explained. The point was that the entire wizarding world would feel the loss. No one could replace him. And indeed, no one did. Not the Ministry, not McGonagall, not even Harry himself. In Deathly Hallows, every plan goes awry, every step is uncertain. That's the world without Dumbledore. The grief is immediate. When Harry stands over Dumbledore's broken body, he feels not just sorrow, but fury. "Dumbledore would have told me," he cries to Snape weeks later. "He would have shown me." But the truth is, Dumbledore had told him, in riddles, in parables, in whispered confessions over the years. "I'm not worried, Harry," Dumbledore had said once. "I am with you." That line now echoes like a ghost. He was always preparing Harry for a world without him. And yet, there were regrets. Dumbledore himself, in the strange limbo of King's Cross, admitted them. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, he tells Harry in Deathly Hallows. More for your peace of mind than my plan. He confesses his early lust for power, his brother's resentment, his sister's death. In Death, we see the man behind the legend, a man who made mistakes, who was ashamed, who was afraid, and in that moment, perhaps more than any other, we understand that he truly had to die, not just for plot, but for character, for truth. Rowling's pain in writing that chapter was palpable. She revised it dozens of times. I cried the whole way through, she later said. It was like killing someone I loved. In early drafts, Dumbledore died differently, struck down by fire or by the cursed ring. But none of it felt right. Only the moment on the tower with Snape, with the lightning in the distance, with the shattered trust, it was Shakespearean, tragic, and irreversible. The lightning struck one last time, Rowling wrote, illuminating the high walls of the astronomy tower, and Dumbledore fell. The death shook Hogwarts to its core. The great Phoenix Forks sang his lament and disappeared forever. The headmaster's office sealed itself. His portrait appeared behind the desk, unmoving, watching silently. The Order of the Phoenix reeled. The students wept. Even the portraits seemed subdued. Without Dumbledore, there was no shield between Hogwarts and the darkness. Death Eaters could walk the halls. The school would soon fall into the hands of Severus Snape, not as a spy, but as its master. But perhaps the greatest impact was on Harry. In that moment he saw the truth. The war was his, not Dumbledore's, not the Order's. He's gone, he whispered to Ginny. He's really gone. And then, in one of the most powerful scenes in the series, Harry walks away from love. He breaks off his relationship with Ginny, not out of lack of feeling, but out of duty. I can't be with you, he says. I've got things to do. That's what Dumbledore's death did. It forced Harry to grow up. And yet, the echoes of Dumbledore never faded. His voice guided Harry through the forest when he walked to his own death. His memories, preserved in Snape's tears, revealed the last pieces of the puzzle. He had planned everything, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility. He had prepared Harry for sacrifice, just as he had prepared Snape for betrayal. You are the seventh Horcrux, he had realized long ago, but he couldn't say it, not until the end. Rowling's later interviews reflect a writer still haunted by the choice. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd let him live, she mused. But I think the story would have lost something essential. It's about facing life without your heroes. Fans still debate whether it was the right call. Couldn't Dumbledore have helped more? Couldn't he have survived the curse? But those questions miss the point. Dumbledore's death was not a plot hole, it was a lesson, a sacrifice, a symbol. And so we remember him not just for his power, but for his flaws, his kindness, his laughter, his secrets. After all, to the well-organized mind, he once said, death is but the next great adventure. In that one line he gave us comfort. In his fall he gave us purpose. And in his absence he gave Harry, and all of us, the strength to carry on. He might have been more than a martyr. He could have been a general, a spell slinger in the final duel, a strategist, a symbol of defiance. But Rowling didn't write that story. She wrote a quieter tragedy, a death on a tower, a promise kept, a boy alone, staring into the darkness with nothing but his wand, his courage, and the memory of a man who once said, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without." Love. There is still grief in those pages, still a sense that something immense was lost. Rowling understood it. "It's strange," she said once. "People ask me if I miss writing Harry, but I miss writing Dumbledore more." Perhaps that's why his spirit lingers in every corner of the books that followed. His absence shapes every decision. His past explains every mystery. And his legacy, wisdom, sacrifice, love, remains the heartbeat of the story. Albus Dumbledore did not die in vain. His fall opened the path to victory. His silence forced truth into the light. His death was the key to Voldemort's defeat, though the world only understood that much later. When Harry stood in the Forbidden Forest, wandless, ready to die, it was Dumbledore's lesson he remembered. "Love," he had said, "love, Harry, is the only thing worth fighting for." And so the tale remains. A story not just of spells and curses, but of choices, of the cost of wisdom, of the burden of leadership. Dumbledore chose his end, not for glory, not for show, but because he knew that true victory comes not from power, but from letting go. That is the final gift he gave to Harry and to us. Number 19, Harry's emotional trauma. He watched his parents die before he could walk. He lived beneath a cupboard, counting spiders and bruises. He faced monsters before he understood dreams. Harry James Potter, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the savior of the wizarding world, was, before anything else, a child molded by grief. And yet, as readers followed him through 7 increasingly dangerous years, the sharpest cut often went unnoticed, the wound inside his mind. The books rarely paused to explore it. The war left graves, but not the trembling hands and sleepless nights we might expect. One must ask, where is Harry Potter's trauma? From the very first book, The Philosopher's Stone, Harry is depicted not as a boy aching with loss, but as a lonely figure with quiet resilience. When Hagrid tells him, "You're a wizard, Harry," the boy doesn't break down. He doesn't question the cruelty he endured for 11 years under the Dursleys' roof. Instead, he accepts it all with an eerie calm. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive. Harry, who had never had a birthday party, who had never known love, stood quietly. That silence isn't peace. It's the silence of a child who's learned not to cry because no one will listen. The cupboard under the stairs should have been a symbol of severe neglect, even abuse. Harry was locked away, starved, taunted. Vernon Dursley screamed at him. Petunia pretended he didn't exist. Dudley punched him. Yet in the narrative, these moments are passed off with grim humour, almost quaint in tone. J.K. Rowling later admitted that she softened Harry's emotional reality to keep the story accessible to children. But in truth, children like Harry exist, and they don't emerge unscarred. Even in his first year at Hogwarts, when others marvel at magic and sweets, Harry remains haunted by the image of his parents' death. In The Mirror of Erised, he finds their reflection and sits in front of it night after night. He had to tear his eyes away from his mother's face. That line should have unravelled him. But the next chapter continues, full of potions and chess games, as if a boy longing to touch his dead mother's hand wasn't quietly breaking apart. Dumbledore gently warns it does not do to dwell on dreams, but how else should an orphan mourn? In his second year, Harry hears voices, literally. A whispering serpent in the walls speaks to him, and he doubts his own mind. "You will find that I will only truly have left this school when none here are loyal to me," Dumbledore says, offering encouragement. But no one asks Harry what it's like to question his sanity at 12. No teacher checks in, no class discusses trauma. Harry ends the year stabbing a diary and nearly dying, but by September he's back to school smiling on the train. By his third year, the cracks should be visible. The Dementors arrive, and for the first time we see a visceral reaction. "Every time they get too near me, I can hear Voldemort murdering my mum." Harry admits this to Lupin in The Prisoner of Azkaban. He faints. He collapses. Finally, we see his vulnerability laid bare. Lupin responds with kindness and offers him practical defense lessons. It is one of the few moments in the entire series where Harry is treated not as a warrior in training, but as a boy battling a ghost in his chest. But even this moment fades. By the end of that book, the focus shifts again. Time travel, Buckbeak, Sirius's escape. There is no follow-up to Harry's psychological turmoil, no discussion of how the Dementors have changed him. He returns to Privet Drive for another summer, expected to endure more cruelty, more silence, and he does. The fourth book, The Goblet of Fire, shatters any remaining innocence. Cedric Diggory dies, Voldemort returns. Harry is tied to a tombstone, cut, forced to witness a resurrection soaked in blood. "Kill the spare," says Wormtail, and the world changes. And yet by the next chapter, Harry is back at Hogwarts. A funeral is held, people grieve. But Harry is left mostly alone. He cannot speak about what he's seen, not truly. Dumbledore later admits, "You have shown bravery beyond anything I could have expected, but not once does anyone ask, 'Are you sleeping? Do you have nightmares? Do you want to talk?'" Book 5 begins with Harry isolated, angry, haunted. Finally, something close to realism. He snaps at Ron, he yells at Hermione, he feels rage, confusion, abandonment. This version of Harry is raw, but instead of a support system, he's punished, he's branded unstable. The Daily Prophet paints him as delusional. "I don't want to be human," Harry says at one point. "I want to be a creature of pain." It is one of the most tragic lines in the series, and yet it receives no reflection. No teacher sees the signs, no friend gently sits beside him in the night. Then comes Sirius. His godfather, his only link to family, dies in a swirl of black veils. Harry screams. He trashes Dumbledore's office. For a moment we see the child behind the hero. But Dumbledore, who loves Harry, who admits his own flaws, still doesn't guide him through grief. He delivers speeches about prophecy, about fate. But who guides Harry through mourning? Who tells him that loss is not weakness? In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry continues to fight, to spy, to strategize. Dumbledore dies, and still, Harry's grief is short-lived on the page. A few pages of sorrow, a funeral, and then the chase begins again. The trio is on the run. In The Deathly Hallows, Harry becomes a soldier. He digs graves, buries Dobby with his bare hands, fights Nagini, watches Fred die, Lupin, Tonks. So many deaths, and yet we rarely linger. There's no pause for mental collapse. The most disturbing silence occurs after the Battle of Hogwarts. Bodies are piled in the Great Hall. Harry walks past them, friends, teachers, surrogate family. He talks with Dumbledore's ghost. He kills Voldemort. And then, what? The story fast forwards. There is no therapy, no national reckoning, no support groups for child soldiers. In the epilogue, 19 years later, Harry is calm. He smiles. All was well. But was it? J.K. Rowling later acknowledged this omission. She confessed that Harry's trauma was simplified. "I was writing for a younger audience," she said in an interview. "But I do believe that if I wrote it again, I would have shown more of that internal battle. Harry survived a war, and war leaves marks." Indeed, there were moments when Rowling hinted at deeper wounds. When Harry sees the Thestrals, magical creatures only visible to those who've seen death, he remarks how he didn't see them last year. Hermione tries to comfort him, but neither of them truly confronts what it means. To see Thestrals is to be marked by death. Harry sees them, Luna sees them, Neville might, but these characters, bonded by sorrow, never sit and speak of their pain. And what of the nightmares? They're mentioned, brushed aside. Harry woke in a cold sweat. He had dreamed of Cedric again. These phrases come and go, but they never dig. The reader must imagine the rest, the shaking hands, the dread in the morning light, the haunted stare when no one's looking. We know these symptoms. We know PTSD. Harry shows them all, but the books rarely name it. What makes this absence more painful is how many readers found themselves in Harry. Children who lost parents, teens in foster care, survivors of abuse. They looked to Harry as a mirror, and when they saw him pushing through without breakdowns, some wondered, "Why can't I? Why do I cry at night when he never does? Why do I fall apart when he stood tall?" This is not a failure of character. It is a missed opportunity for healing. If Harry had sat with McGonagall and spoken of nightmares, if he had told Ginny about hearing his mother scream, if he had broken down in front of Ron after Fred died, those moments would not have weakened him. They would have made him real. They would have shown readers that even heroes can hurt, especially heroes. Luna Lovegood, often dismissed as odd, offered one of the most profound lines in the series. Things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the way we expect. But what of the things we never mourn? The wounds never dressed, the screams never released. Do they return too? Rowling did try, post-publication, to fill in these blanks. In interviews, in Pottermore entries, she spoke of Harry becoming an aura, then a father, then someone still carrying scars. She said he likely had trauma, but the books, the sacred texts to fans, don't carry that clarity. The ink is dry. The silence remains. Perhaps the most poignant thing about Harry Potter is not the magic or the battles or even the friendship. It's the idea that children can be hurt deeply and still carry the world. But what would have been even more powerful is showing that they shouldn't have to, that it's okay to fall, that it's okay to need help, because Harry wasn't just the boy who lived, he was the boy who hurt, and we should have seen it. Number 20, lack of a global wizarding world. When Harry Potter boarded the Hogwarts Express for the first time, the world of magic opened like a door we never wanted to close. Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, the Forbidden Forest, all vivid, all alive. Yet by the time Voldemort fell and silence returned to the Great Hall, many of us were left with a peculiar ache. Not for more of Harry's story necessarily, but for more of the world, because magic, surely, didn't stop at the English Channel. Take Durmstrang, for instance. Hidden in the snowy folds of northern Europe, the school is shrouded in mystery, more fortress than institution. We meet it through Victor Krum, the brooding seeker from Bulgaria, but even Krum, despite being a window to another world, speaks mostly of Hogwarts. "I like it here, it is warm," he mutters at the Yule Ball. That single line, meant to be humorous, leaves a trail of curiosity. What is Durmstrang's curriculum? Who are its ghosts? What are their legends? Then there's Beauxbatons, all elegance and enchantment, introduced with Fleur Delacour floating into the great hall as if on a breeze. We see her headmistress Madame Maxime, and glimpses of carriages drawn by winged horses. But what lies beyond? The French Alps cradle the school, but no tales of French magical history follow. Were there wizard revolutionaries, magical salons, a French ministry of magic embroiled in scandals and spells? These questions deepen as one realizes how silent the rest of the globe remains. In 7 books filled with portkeys and broomsticks and pensives, there is barely a whisper of Asia. No Chinese ministry of magic, no Japanese one law, no Indian magical beasts. The only mention of Asia comes from Parvati Patil's name, and even then, her culture is never explored, as if heritage could exist in name only. America, too, is mostly a blank slate in the original books. It's only in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them that we finally step onto American magical soil. MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, rises like a gold-plated fortress in 1920s New York. President Serafina Picquery presides with authority, and we learn about Ilvermorny, the American wizarding school. Founded by Isolde Serre, a descendant of Salazar Slytherin, Ilvermorny offers a rich, complex history. Yet even this feels retrofitted, like a tale told late at night to fill a silence that had long settled. And what of Africa? J.K. Rowling once revealed, outside the books, that the largest wizarding school on the continent is called Ouagadougou, hidden in the mountains of the moon. African wizards, she said, are especially skilled in astronomy, alchemy, and self-transfiguration. Wands there are often seen as a European invention, but none of this ever makes it to the pages of Harry's story. The books remain anchored to Britain, as if the magic of the globe must wait its turn. fans took notice. Why is the wizarding world so small? One user wrote on MuggleNet in 2006. Are American wizards hiding under rocks? The sentiment was echoed far and wide. A world where wizards live in hiding, using magic to cloak themselves, should, in theory, be sprawling. The magical globe should be stitched together with secret passageways and ancient alliances. Instead, it felt like a village with unusually active residents. Rowling herself acknowledged this. In an interview following the release of The Cursed Child, she said, "Harry's story was very British. I wanted to stay in that lane. But yes, I sometimes wish I had let the world open up a bit more." The regret was genuine, if belated. It was this realization that pushed her toward the Fantastic Beasts films, where New York, Paris, and Rio were meant to become enchanted puzzle pieces of a larger world. But for many, the spell was already fractured. Consider the potential of an Asian magical epic. Imagine a wizard in Kyoto trained in elemental magic passed down through generations. Perhaps his ancestors were spiritual advisors to samurai clans, his spells interwoven with calligraphy and ancient folklore. Or a Mongolian sorceress who rides enchanted horses across the steppe, whispering to wind spirits as her people once did. None of this exists in the canon, and yet it lives vividly in the minds of readers. There is no mention of a magical Australia either. A continent known for its deadly creatures and Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, it practically begs for wizarding lore. What if magical Australians crafted staves instead of wands imbued with native stories and the spirits of the land? What if they tamed magical marsupials? We don't know, because no one in the book seems to ask. Even within Europe, silence lingers. Eastern European magic, with its tapestry of folklore, vampires and forest spirits, remains untouched. Russia, with its old churches and snowbound villages, could house a magical tradition as vast and mysterious as Hogwarts. Perhaps a Russian equivalent of the Room of Requirement lies beneath a cathedral, hidden in echoes, but Rowling, pressed by the constraints of her narrative, never goes there. South America, there's a name, Castelo Bruxo, mentioned in supplemental writings, located in the Amazon rainforest, where students wear bright green robes and study magical herbology. Yet there's no face to this school, no story, no duel or beast or forbidden spell. It exists, like a shadow behind a curtain, acknowledged but unexplored. This narrow focus impacts more than geography. It touches on representation. Many fans, especially from underrepresented countries, longed to see themselves in the magic. "I wanted a Chinese Dumbledore," wrote one user on Reddit, or a Kenyan Aura, or an Argentine Seeker who could fly without a broom. The longing was less about tokenism and more about belonging, a desire to be seen in a world that promised wonder, but delivered mostly English charm. One of the most telling examples comes from Goblet of Fire, when foreign delegations arrive at Hogwarts. The students of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang are introduced with flair, blue silk, fur-lined cloaks, dramatic entrances, but they are still guests. They orbit around Harry's story, satellites to a British sun. No deeper dives into their schoolhouses, magical creatures, or philosophies occur. Even Fleur Delacour, brave and proud, becomes a caricature of vanity before finding redemption through love. This is not to say that Rowling's world lacks depth. On the contrary, it is teeming with details. Every street in Diagon Alley has a story, every ghost a history. But in building such a detailed local world, the global one was left underdeveloped. A room filled with magic, but with the windows closed, and the irony, the books hint at a larger world constantly. The Salem Witches Institute, mentioned briefly in Goblet of Fire, the International Confederation of Wizards, references to ancient magical texts that predate Hogwarts itself. All these serve as teasers to a larger, richer world that never fully arrives. It's in fan creations that this world is often completed. Writers on platforms like AO3 and fanfiction.net have filled in the blanks. There are stories of Brazilian potion masters, Korean spellweavers, Egyptian curse breakers who battle tomb magic. One story follows a magical journalist traveling the globe, interviewing wizards in hidden cities, each with their own dialect, dress, and code. What fans create, they create not just for fun, but to heal a gap they felt in the original books. In a world as globalized as ours, the British-centered view can feel limiting. Harry's journey, as universal as it is, represents only a fragment of what could have been. Imagine a world where the Triwizard Tournament became the Deca Wizard Championship, where Hogwarts students went on magical exchange years, where the Order of the Phoenix had chapters in Istanbul, Johannesburg, and Seoul. The hunger for this expansion led to the anticipation of fantastic beasts. Finally, we would walk through Wizarding Paris. We would meet new magical creatures, new families, new ways of spellcraft. For a while, the promise glimmered, but again the stories narrowed, the plotline coiled around Grindelwald, Dumbledore, and a British prophecy. The world once again became a backdrop for white familiar faces. The most heartbreaking truth is that the seeds were there all along. Magic, by nature, is borderless. It transcends language and politics. A spell in Swahili, a charm in Icelandic, a potion brewed in Bangkok, all could have been part of a tapestry that reminded readers that wonder belongs to everyone. Rowling gave us a key, but the castle it opens remains half-imagined. As time passes, the fandom doesn't forget. Artists draw maps of the magical world. Fans invent new schools, languages, and traditions. They name magical cities like the Whispering Market of Marrakesh or the Crystal Docks of Hanoi. They give us enchanted bullet trains in Japan, talking volcanoes in Iceland, underwater wizard palaces off the coast of New Zealand. In many ways, the legacy of Harry Potter is no longer just Rowling's. It belongs to every reader who ever felt the thrill of the first spell. And so even if the book stopped at the British border, the magic has not. It has flown, on broomsticks and phoenix wings, far beyond. Number 21, Cho Chang's one-dimensional arc. Cho Chang stepped into the world of Harry Potter, not as a fleeting extra or a background student in the corridors of Hogwarts, but as a vision, radiant, graceful, and gentle-eyed. She was the seeker for Ravenclaw, one of the few girls who could fly as fiercely as the boys. Harry noticed her not just for her beauty, but for the way she carried herself, calm, focused, and kind. Harry couldn't help noticing that she was very pretty, Rowling wrote in Prisoner of Azkaban, planting the seed for what would become his first serious crush. But what started as youthful admiration quickly turned into a deeply tangled tale of heartbreak, miscommunication, and ultimately a character unjustly reduced to tears and silence. It's impossible to speak about Cho without mentioning Cedric Diggory. Cedric was more than just her boyfriend. He was the Hufflepuff hero, the Triwizard champion, the golden boy of Hogwarts. When Voldemort returned and Cedric was murdered, Cho didn't just lose someone she loved, she lost safety, innocence, and perhaps her belief in the certainty of life itself. The impact of his death rippled through her soul. Rowling captures the moment in Goblet of Fire. Kill the spare. And just like that, Cho's world collapsed. What followed was a year of grief, confusion, and emotional chaos, none of which the narrative allowed her to explore fully, and certainly not with the grace she deserved. When Cho re-emerges in Order of the Phoenix, she does so cloaked in sadness. Her eyes, once bright, are clouded. Her voice is strained. The girl Harry had admired is now drowning in a storm of mourning. And yet, she still chooses to fight. She joins Dumbledore's army, practicing defensive spells with dedication. "I think we ought to all sign our names," she says, suggesting the parchment oath to strengthen the group's loyalty. That's not the act of a weak, weeping girl. It's the action of someone trying to reclaim control. But despite her strength, the narrative keeps returning her to the same two expressions. tears and tension. Their first kiss is a moment of sweet confusion, yet it's shadowed by her sorrow. She was crying, Harry tells Ron and Hermione, puzzled. Hermione answers gently, "Well, obviously she's feeling very sad because of Cedric dying. Then I expect she feels confused because she liked Cedric, and now she likes Harry, and she can't work out who she likes best." Rowling tried to show the messy nature of grief, of teenage emotion, but instead of letting Cho evolve beyond that moment, the story traps her in it. Her entire character becomes a portrait of emotional fragility, misunderstood even by the people she reaches out to. Cho's relationship with Harry, though destined to fail, had room to explore themes of guilt, healing, and teenage uncertainty, but their communication breakdowns are never truly resolved. In the cafe at Madame Puddifoot's, the awkward silence and misplaced frustrations are painful to witness, not because they aren't realistic, but because Cho is not given the emotional range to explain herself. "You're just like the others," she snaps at Harry, who clumsily mentions Hermione. Her grief lashes out, desperate for validation. But in that moment, Rowling lets Harry's perspective dominate. Cho's pain becomes an inconvenience, a problem to be avoided. Even her betrayal, if one dares to call it that, is misunderstood. In Order of the Phoenix, it's Cho's friend Marietta who reveals the DA's secret to Umbridge. Cho defends her, explaining she was pressured by her mother, who works at the ministry. But instead of this being an opportunity to delve into the complexity of loyalty and fear under a rising dictatorship, Cho is dismissed. Harry coldly cuts her off. "I don't want to talk to you," he says. No explanation, no listening. The girl who once meant so much to him is now reduced to a passing regret. Rowling herself later admitted in interviews that she mishandled Cho's arc. "I gave her grief and nothing else," she said. "She became the girl who cried, and I feel that wasn't fair to her." And indeed, Cho had the potential to be more. She was top of her class, a skilled Quidditch player, and a fighter who risked her place at Hogwarts to join Dumbledore's army. She wasn't weak, she was surviving. Yet the narrative, told so firmly through Harry's eyes, never let her become a full person in her own right. This is particularly tragic when considering how much depth Cho's story could have held. Imagine a scene where she stands in front of Cedric's memorial, placing her hand against the stone, whispering promises to live fiercely in his honor. Or a confrontation with Marietta, not of anger, but of understanding, showing Cho's growth in forgiveness. We see none of that. Instead, after her falling out with Harry, she fades into the background. By Half-Blood Prince, she's a name on a list, a face in the Great Hall. The girl who once lit up Harry's thoughts is now just another student. Compare this to Ginny Weasley, whose character blossoms over time. Ginny gets anger, joy, triumph, strength. She gets to fall, rise, and shine. Cho gets a few rainy afternoons and a breakup. Even Lavender Brown, comic relief though she may be, gets a full emotional arc. Why not Cho? Why was she left behind? Part of the answer may lie in the choice to view Cho only through Harry's lens. His discomfort with her grief, his lack of maturity in handling her emotions. These are understandable traits of a 15-year-old boy. But the story doesn't counterbalance them with Cho's inner world. We never hear her private thoughts. We never see her cry alone, or laugh with friends, or confide in someone who listens. We are left only with Harry's version of her, which is narrow and often unkind. It's worth noting that Cho's role as a romantic figure of color also raises questions. In a world where most main characters are white, Cho's Asian identity stood out. She could have brought cultural nuance, a broader sense of diversity, and a new perspective to the magical world. Instead, she becomes the sad girl, and her ethnicity is never explored or respected. She is exoticized, then erased. Her name, 2 monosyllables that many readers found stereotypical, was already a point of criticism. Rowling later defended it, claiming the name was accurate to East Asian naming conventions. Still, the lack of any background for Cho, family, heritage, dreams, makes it hard not to feel that she was used rather than loved by the narrative. Fans have tried to reclaim Cho, writing fan fiction where she becomes an aura or a healer or a teacher who helps students through grief. Some imagine her founding a scholarship in Cedric's name. Others picture her returning to Hogwarts after the Battle of Hogwarts to help rebuild, shoulder to shoulder with Neville and Luna. These imagined futures are richer and more just than the silence she was given in canon. And what of her final appearance? In Deathly Hallows, Cho appears briefly during the preparations for the Battle of Hogwarts. She offers to escort Harry to Ravenclaw Tower. It's Luna, not Cho, who is chosen to go, and Rowling writes that Ginny insists on it. "No, Luna will take Harry, won't you, Luna?" she says pointedly. The tone is clear. Ginny, the new love, is asserting dominance. Cho is politely dismissed. It's subtle but painful. The girl who once shared a kiss with Harry under mistletoe is now just a rival, gently pushed aside. There was no farewell for Cho, no closure, no final scene where she walks away, stronger, wiser, ready for a new life. The war ends, the names are counted, and Cho is left unnamed. Her grief, once so central, is now forgotten. Cedric is memorialized. Cho is erased. This is a shame not only for Cho but for readers who saw themselves in her. Teenagers grappling with grief, confusion, love, and loss needed someone like her, someone imperfect, emotional, and brave. But they needed to see her rise, not just fall. They needed to see her reclaim joy, trust again, become more than a footnote in someone else's story. Grief does not change you, the author Cheryl Strayed once wrote. It reveals you. Cho's grief could have revealed greatness. Instead, it was used to paint her as inconvenient, overwrought, replaceable. In real life, we know grief is complex, unpredictable, but it does not strip us of our dignity. Fiction should honor that truth. And so we remember Cho Chang not as the girl who cried, or the girl who couldn't choose, or the girl who vanished. We remember her as the girl who flew higher than most, who dared to love a boy who never returned, who faced death and still joined the fight. We remember her for the quiet strength between the tears, for the potential that still burns in the unwritten chapters of her life. Number 22, Draco Malfoy's Missed Redemption. In the shadowy corridors of Hogwarts, amidst secrets whispered through ancient stone, walked a boy burdened by a legacy he never chose. Draco Malfoy, once the epitome of arrogance and pure-blood pride, stood on the precipice of darkness during his 6th year, his wand trembling not from weakness, but from the quiet rebellion of a soul beginning to unravel. For years, readers watched him jeer, sneer, and mock, a silver-haired antagonist painted in strokes of cruelty and privilege. But something changed in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, a shift, subtle yet seismic. He was no longer just the schoolyard villain, he was a child soldier conscripted into a war he didn't understand. And that perhaps was the tragedy Rowling never fully explored. The moment he stood opposite Albus Dumbledore, wand raised, the storm within him raged silently. "Draco," said Dumbledore gently, "you are not a killer." That line wasn't just a guess, it was a lifeline thrown by a dying man to a drowning boy. Dumbledore saw the tremble in his wrist, the flicker of doubt in his pale eyes. He saw not a murderer, but a boy clinging desperately to the last threads of his innocence. In that instant, Draco's arc touched something raw and human. Here was a child who wanted to save his family, but not at the cost of his soul. And yet after this peak of emotional turmoil, Draco fades. Not gradually, not with growth or reflection, but abruptly, as though the depth of his conflict was too heavy for the narrative to carry. The next time we truly see him, he is running for his life in the room of requirement. Gone is the boy at the astronomy tower, replaced by a vague figure whose internal storm is never again addressed. He shouts, he scrambles, he survives, but he no longer evolves. Rowling, in interviews, confessed to the oversight. "Draco," she once said, "was not a villain. He was a scared boy raised in a prejudiced household. I think he deserved more of a chance at redemption than I gave him." It was a rare admission, a glimpse behind the curtain of storytelling where even the most intricate narratives sometimes leave certain threads frayed and unfinished. What makes this omission so poignant is the potential that lay in Draco's redemption arc. Throughout Half-Blood Prince, subtle scenes hint at a boy unraveling. When Harry finds him sobbing in the bathroom, face down in his own reflection, there's no laughter left in Draco, only fear, only desperation. He casts the Cruciatus curse, yes, but it's wild, untrained, and reflexive, not cold-blooded. His attempt to repair the vanishing cabinet isn't done with joy or ambition. It's grim, burdensome. This is not a young man reveling in power. This is a teenager slowly crumbling under its weight. What makes this even more layered is how Narcissa and Lucius, too, are portrayed as fractured by the same burden. Their presence at Voldemort's side is no longer a matter of conviction, but of necessity. The Malfoy name, once proud and untouchable, becomes a chain around Draco's neck. He isn't trying to ascend, he's trying to survive. And that makes the lack of narrative closure sting. We're shown the cracks, we're shown the storm, but we're denied the aftermath. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco is a ghost, present, yes, but spectral in the storyline. He doesn't fight for Voldemort nor for Hogwarts. He stumbles around, calls for help, and is rescued, not once, but twice, by Harry and Ron. These acts are not framed as redemption. They're framed as duty on Harry's part. "That's twice you've saved his life," Ron mutters, and Harry, ever the reluctant hero, simply nods. But what about Draco? What does he think? What does he feel in that moment? We never know. The door to his heart is left closed. In the epilogue, we see him again, briefly, standing on platform 9 3/4 with his wife Astoria and his son Scorpius. He nods at Harry. There's no dialogue, no insight, just a glance. Fans were left to interpret that single moment as proof of transformation. But that's not a resolution, it's a placeholder, a silent, ambiguous coda to a character who had once stood at the crossroads of damnation and deliverance. What makes it all the more haunting is how Draco's arc mirrors that of Severus Snape in miniature. Snape was given space, depth, layers, his betrayal, his love, his redemption. They were explored with painful intricacy. Draco, in contrast, was abandoned mid-transition, and yet the two were not so different. Both were Slytherins, both were shaped by their environments, both made terrible choices. But while Snape was granted a final chapter bathed in tragedy and revelation, Draco's story was cut short. He was, in Rowling's own words, left unfinished. Readers noticed. Fans wrote entire novels, fan fiction, essays, analyses, trying to give Draco the arc he was denied. Some imagined him becoming a teacher at Hogwarts, dedicated to showing students that redemption is possible. Others saw him as a quietly tormented father, raising Scorpius with gentleness to correct the mistakes of his own upbringing. The canon gave no answers, so the fandom created its own. And there were moments in the text, even early on, that hinted at Draco's deeper potential. When Buckbeak slashes his arm and Draco cries out not in fury, but in wounded pride, we see a boy desperate for attention, not blood. When Hermione punches him in Prisoner of Azkaban, and he whimpers rather than retaliates, we see his cowardice, but also his humanity. Even his insults, childish and repetitive, betray a boy trying to uphold an image, not a cause. He was never truly dark, just lost. Rowling once said that Draco represented the idea that some people are raised in belief systems that they later question. It's a powerful theme, one that resonates deeply in a world where ideology often trumps empathy. But that theme demands resolution. And Draco never got one. He was on the brink of becoming something more than his bloodline. But the story blinked, and the moment passed. Compare this to characters like Neville Longbottom, who began weak and unsure but rose to heroism, or Regulus Black, who died trying to undo his mistakes. Even Percy Weasley, who betrayed his family for ambition, was given a redemption moment during the final battle. Why not Draco? Was it because he never publicly denounced Voldemort? Because he didn't raise his wand for the light? Or was it simply a matter of space, of narrative priority? In the grand machinery of the plot, perhaps Draco's story was always meant to be a side note. But that doesn't make the omission any less glaring, especially because readers saw the potential, because he wasn't evil, he was vulnerable. And vulnerability, when explored, is where literature finds its greatest truths. When Dumbledore says, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," the quote isn't just meant for the boy who lived. It was meant for everyone, especially those like Draco, who stood at a crossroads and hesitated. His choice not to kill wasn't just an act of cowardice. It was courage, a quiet, trembling, human kind of courage, the kind that doesn't win wars but saves souls. And what of Astoria? We're told in interviews that she was a gentlewoman, sickly, kind, and determined to raise Scorpius away from the toxicity of pure-blood supremacy. It's implied that Draco loved her deeply, that he changed for her. But we never see that change. We're only told about it in passing, a whisper of transformation where there could have been a storm. Imagine a scene, Draco, years after the war, visiting the ruins of Hogwarts, touching the stone where Dumbledore died, reflecting, regretting, remembering the moment his hand shook, the moment he chose not to become a murderer. That moment could have echoed through his life, could have shaped his fatherhood, his marriage, his soul, but we never get to witness it. Instead, Draco is relegated to what Rowling called a cautionary figure, a symbol, a reminder. But Draco Malfoy wasn't a symbol, he was a person, a child of war, a boy with trembling hands and a heart full of confusion. And people like that don't just disappear. They struggle, they rise, or they fall, but they don't fade. Perhaps in the end that's why his story lingers in the minds of so many, because it's incomplete, because it aches with unanswered questions, because it feels real. Life rarely offers neat endings. People don't transform in a day. They drift, they relapse, they change slowly. And maybe, just maybe, that's the unspoken truth of Draco Malfoy, a boy who stepped away from the edge but never quite found his path forward. And yet, we still wonder what might have been if the story had followed him a little longer, if we'd seen his first apology, his first act of defiance against his family's ideals, his first moment of peace. Would he have become a hero? Or something more complex, more human, just a man trying to be better than he was? The truth is, we'll never know. But in that space of uncertainty, in the silence after the storm, Draco Malfoy remains, unfinished, unresolved, unforgettable. Number 23, Mad-Eye Moody's off-screen death. Of all the losses in the Harry Potter saga, there are some that strike like lightning, sudden, sharp, and unforgettable. Others slip by with a quiet, painful finality, like the closing of a door that should have remained open. The death of Alastor Mad-Eye. Moody falls into the second category, a legendary aura, a relentless warrior, and a deeply complex character. Moody was more than a veteran soldier in the fight against Voldemort. He was a symbol, and yet his death was delivered not in the thunder of battle or a noble last stand, but in the cold briefness of a single sentence. Mad-Eye's dead. Just like that. No scene, no farewell, no glory. Moody's story deserved more than that. He had been a force in the wizarding world long before Harry was born. By the time we meet him in the Goblet of Fire, he's already known as the man who put half the prisoners in Azkaban. His magical eye, swiveling 360 degrees in its socket, became an icon of his unrelenting vigilance. Constant vigilance, that was his motto, and it wasn't just a saying, it was how he lived. He had lost an eye, a leg, and a great deal of peace of mind to the cause, and yet he kept going, dragging his battle-worn body and haunted mind into every fight that needed him. Even before Harry meets the real Mad Eye, his reputation precedes him. The imposter Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Moody, gives the fourth-year students a taste of what real defense against the dark arts teaching looks like. The unforgivable curses, the grim reality of magical combat, these things are not filtered through the cheerful platitudes of other professors. Moody, or rather, the man pretending to be him, doesn't sugarcoat the war that lies ahead, and that philosophy, that hard-edged preparation, ends up saving lives. When the real Moody is freed from the magical trunk he was locked in, we never truly get a full moment with him alone. But even from that brief glimpse in Order of the Phoenix, we understand what he's made of. He's the one leading members of the Order to protect Harry during his evacuation from Privet Drive. He's the first to smell danger, the first to raise his wand, the first to trust no one. "We're all in grave danger," he says flatly, as if stating the weather. That's Mad Eye, always ready, always on edge. He trains Harry and protects him as if the boy were his own son. He isn't warm, not in the usual sense. He doesn't offer hugs or gentle encouragement, but he shows his love through action. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, he stands beside other Order members as they fight off Death Eaters. Even Tonks, who idolizes him, fights with a fire clearly stoked by Moody's mentorship. He may not say much, but his presence commands loyalty. His authority is never questioned. It is in the Deathly Hallows that Moody's final moments, what little we hear of them, are revealed. The Order devises a dangerous plan to move Harry from Privet Drive using 7 decoys. Each is paired with a protector. Moody takes Mundungus Fletcher, a man with questionable loyalties. The moment is tense. Moody, unsurprisingly, doesn't trust Fletcher, and rightly so. During the ambush, Fletcher panics and disapparates. In the chaos, Moody is hit by Voldemort's killing curse and falls from his broom. That's it. That's all we're told. Harry asks, desperate to know. "Mad Eye's dead?" Lupin nods, tight-lipped. "Voldemort tried to kill me. He killed Mad Eye. There's no body to recover, no final words. No battlefield strewn with curses and valor. Only an absence, an empty chair, a void where a hero once stood." J.K. Rowling later explained this choice. She wanted to show the brutality and randomness of war, that even legends can fall without warning, that not every death is poetic. "I wanted the war to feel real," she said. "And real war doesn't give you time to mourn every soldier." But she also admitted her regret. "Moody deserved a scene," she confessed in an interview. "He deserved a moment. I wish I had given him one." And she's right, because the emotional impact of Moody's death is muted not by the lack of love from readers, but by the absence of narrative closure. Fred Weasley dies in the middle of battle, but we see his family cry over his body. Sirius falls through the veil and Harry screams. Dobby dies in Harry's arms. Even Snape, a man long cloaked in moral ambiguity, is given final words, memories, and a tearful farewell. But Mad Eye, he vanishes between sentences. Imagine, just for a moment, what could have been Moody riding his broom through a storm of curses, one eye fixed on Fletcher, the other scanning for danger. He shouts a warning, hurls a curse, shields a comrade. Voldemort rises, wand outstretched, eyes locked on Moody. "You again," Voldemort sneers. "Always in the way." Moody raises his wand. "Constant vigilance," he growls. A flash of green. Silence, his body falling through the air. That's a death worthy of Mad Eye Moody. Instead, we are left with stories. Bill Weasley finds Moody's magical eye nailed to Umbridge's office door later in the book. A sick trophy, a cruel insult. Harry is horrified. He retrieves it and buries it. It's one of the few acts of closure he can offer. "It seemed a poor token of remembrance," Rowling writes, "but he buried it beneath a tree in the forest." That is the only funeral Moody gets, but to fans, his memory burns brighter. His death may not have been shown on the page, but his legacy lingers. Every time Harry lifts his wand with confidence, every time Tonks duels with grit and fury, every time Kingsley leads with calm strength, Mad Eye's influence echoes. He is in the steel of their spines, the sharpness of their instincts. His paranoia, often mocked by others, turns out to be justified. His obsession with safety, checking for polyjuice imposters, setting wards, guarding secrets, is exactly what keeps many members of the Order alive. He wasn't crazy, he was prepared. And in a world where darkness moves fast and trust is fragile, Mad Eye's madness was wisdom in disguise. It's perhaps fitting in a tragic way that his greatest mistake was trusting Mundungus. Fletcher, with his cowardice and selfishness, stands in stark contrast to Moody's honor. And it was this betrayal, more than Voldemort's curse, that killed him. If anyone else had been riding with him, perhaps he'd have had a fighting chance. But Moody didn't complain. He knew the risks. He chose the mission anyway. Kingsley Shacklebolt later tells Harry he was the bravest man I ever knew. And Harry believes him because bravery doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it dies alone in the sky, with no witnesses and no monument. There's something haunting about a warrior dying unseen. Moody, the man who saw everything, did not see his end coming. He who watched constantly, who never let his guard down, was blindsided by betrayal and power. Perhaps that's why it hurts so much, not just because we lost him, but because it felt like the world moved on too fast, as if his life, filled with so much fire, could be reduced to a whisper. Readers still debate whether Moody's death should have been given more weight in the books. And perhaps that's the point. War is not fair. Heroes are not always honored. But in the hearts of readers and in the pages he did appear on, Alastair Moody lives on. Not as a forgotten casualty, but as a man who gave everything for a cause he believed in. If we listen closely, we can still hear him. Constant vigilance? A warning, a command, a promise. The words of a man who never stopped watching, never stopped fighting. Until the sky took him. Until the light faded. Until only his name remained. And in the silence that followed, the war continued, but it did so on the back of men like him, who stood, who fell, and who were never properly mourned. He was not just a casualty. He was a cornerstone, a legend, a soldier whose death had deserved thunder and flame, not footnotes. Mad Eye Moody did not die for nothing, but the story we were given didn't do him justice. Perhaps that's why we keep telling it again and again, until someone finally says the words he never got to hear. Thank you, Mad Eye. You were our shield, our teacher, our friend, and we remember. Number 24 ignored Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw houses. It begins, as always, with the sorting hat. In that echoing hall under the enchanted ceiling, as 11-year-olds step forward one by one, the magical hat announces to the entire school who they are, what they will become. You might belong in Gryffindor, it sings, where dwell the brave at heart. And there, in that moment, the story begins to narrow. Because bravery is a story worth telling, because conflict, when born of courage and cunning, makes for excellent chapters. And so as Harry Potter is sorted into Gryffindor and Draco Malfoy into Slytherin, the die is cast. The world of Hogwarts begins to revolve around a two-sided coin, while the other houses fall quietly into the shadows. The problem is not that Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw are ignored entirely, it's that they are rarely explored with the same narrative depth. What do we learn of Hufflepuff beyond a reputation for fairness and loyalty? Cedric Diggory is our sole window into their world, a golden boy whose kindness and strength glow briefly before being extinguished in the graveyard of Little Hangleton. And Ravenclaw, they are the House of Intellect, of course. But aside from Luna Lovegood, and to a lesser extent Cho Chang, we see little of their inner world. Their values, traditions, and struggles remain mostly uncharted territory. J.K. Rowling herself admitted, in a 2005 interview, that she was perhaps too focused on the Gryffindor-Slytherin conflict. She acknowledged that in doing so she had short-changed the other two houses. This was not a small admission. By the time she said it, the damage was done. 7 books were already taking shape, and the final chapters were not about to pivot toward Ernie Macmillan or Terry Boot. Let us talk about Cedric, for he was meant to be Hufflepuff's beacon, a boy described as handsome, modest, and exceptionally talented. Cedric is all that Helga Hufflepuff might have dreamed of. He was fair-minded, as Dumbledore himself says, a fierce friend, a proud son. And yet Cedric's story is not his own. He exists in the shadow of Harry, and his most dramatic moment, his death, serves as a narrative turning point for the protagonist, not for his house. His legacy, poignant though it is, does little to deepen our understanding of what it truly means to be Hufflepuff. Ravenclaw fares only slightly better. Luna Lovegood, with her dreamy eyes and wild beliefs, steals scenes and hearts alike. She is fiercely intelligent, yes, but also kind, courageous, and uniquely herself. And perhaps that's the issue. Luna is less a symbol of Ravenclaw than a symbol of Luna. Her individuality is what defines her, not her house. When we meet the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's ghost, her tragic story of betrayal and death at the hands of the Bloody Baron is moving, but it comes at the very end, a ghost story used to reveal the next clue in Harry's quest. Even Rowena Ravenclaw herself, a founder, is defined more by the diadem she lost and the daughter who betrayed her than by the house she built. Compare this to the flood of detail we receive about Gryffindor and Slytherin. The Gryffindor common room, with its round tower, its scarlet armchairs, and portraits of famous Gryffindors, becomes a second home for readers. We know the fat lady's voice, her eccentricities, and the passwords that guard the entrance. In Slytherin, the dungeon common room is like a greenish, watery cave, and the students within are not just ambitious, they are legacies, carrying names like Malfoy, Zabini, and Nott. Their ideologies, lineages, and politics are unpacked across thousands of pages. But who guards the Hufflepuff common room? What colour are their walls? What songs do they sing? What values do they debate at night beneath the flickering candles? We never know. Helga Hufflepuff herself is a mystery. While Godric, Salazar, and Rowena are drawn in strokes of legend and rivalry, Helga is reduced to a single defining trait, inclusivity. "I'll teach the lot," the Sorting Hat quotes her. Admirable, but hardly evocative. We hear of Zacharias Smith, of course, but only as a coward. Justin Finch Fletchley appears, but his name is longer than his presence. Hannah Abbott is mentioned, Ernie makes a few speeches, and Susan Bones offers a surname that vaguely hints at ministry connections, but none are truly drawn out. They are sketches beside the vivid oil paintings of Weasley, Snape, and Sirius. Cho Chang enters the narrative as a Ravenclaw seeker, beautiful, quiet, graceful. She is Harry's first crush, and her grief over Cedric adds depth. But she is ultimately sidelined, reduced to a romantic subplot with limited resolution. Her friend Marietta Edgecombe betrays the DA, but her motivations are never explored beyond her mother works for the ministry. They are not characters with arcs, they are placeholders with names. Even when Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students step into the limelight, it is often to serve the narrative needs of Gryffindors. Padma Patil is taken to the Yule Ball by Ron, only to be ignored. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw, dates Percy Weasley, but we learn more about Percy's ambition than Penelope's personality. Michael Corner exists mainly as a counterpoint to Ginny's growing independence. It is telling that we don't even learn the entrances to the Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw dormitories until the final books. The Hufflepuff common room, we are told, is near the kitchens and filled with yellow hangings and copper lamps. The password is replaced with tapping on a barrel, charming but too little, too late. Ravenclaw's entrance requires answering a riddle, which is a lovely nod to their values, but only mentioned when Harry must pass through. These details appear not as intrinsic parts of the school's fabric, but as auxiliary notes inserted when plot demands it. The sorting itself reinforces this imbalance. To be Gryffindor is to be brave, to be Slytherin is to be ambitious, but Ravenclaw, and if you've a ready mind, Hufflepuff, just and loyal. These feel vague, even passive, as if Ravenclaws merely think and Hufflepuffs merely follow the rules, but bravery and ambition, those drive action. They create conflict, resolution, tension. They give rise to battles, betrayal, redemption. Yet in real life, as in good stories, loyalty can be more powerful than ambition. Intelligence can be more dangerous than bravery. The Order of the Phoenix was full of Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs. Nymphadora Tonks, an Auror, and a Metamorphmagus came from Hufflepuff. Her courage and sacrifice rival any Gryffindor's. Professor Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw, is a dueling champion and respected academic. These are not soft traits, these are fierce, worthy ones, but they are not celebrated in the same way. Even the final battle for Hogwarts, where all houses are said to unite, is still shown primarily through the lens of Gryffindor. Harry, Ron, and Hermione lead. Neville, Longbottom, a Gryffindor, rises as a hero. McGonagall, also Gryffindor, commands the statues. Luna appears, yes, and Cho briefly, but their moments are scattered. There is no great Hufflepuff rally, no Ravenclaw stand. Their contributions are implied, not declared. The House Cup, the Quidditch matches, the classroom rivalries, they all orbit the same two houses, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Even in the first book, Dumbledore's dramatic awarding of last-minute points to Gryffindor steals the cup from Slytherin. Hufflepuff, we are told, had done well too, but it means nothing. Their triumphs are background noise. Their losses go unnoticed. Rowling later apologized to fans who felt underrepresented. In one interview, she said, "I have a lot of affection for Hufflepuff, and I think they get a bad rap." She even suggested she might be a Hufflepuff herself. But in fiction, affection means nothing without presence. Characters must be written. Stories must be told. And the irony is this. In the real world, the fans filled the void. Pottermore revealed house traits. Fan fiction and online communities painted rich tapestries of life in Hufflepuff basements and Ravenclaw towers. Readers, starved for depth, created it themselves. They imagined house traditions, weekend rituals, dormitory layouts. They gave faces to names, gave stories to shadows. But the books never returned to them, not in earnest, not in time. In the world Rowling built, Gryffindor and Slytherin got the spotlight. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw were supporting cast, always helpful, never central, always kind or clever, but never dangerous, never central to a prophecy, never the chosen one. It is a flaw not of malice, but of narrative focus. And yet it leaves a hollow echo. What tales might have been told had we followed Anthony Goldstein to the library one day? What secrets lay in the heart of Susan Bones, whose aunt was murdered by Death Eaters? What laughter did the Hufflepuff common room echo with, far from the torches of the Gryffindor Tower? Perhaps we will never know. The story has ended, the ink is dry, but the readers remember. The readers always do. Number 25, Neglected Magical Creatures. It begins, as always, with the sorting hat. In that echoing hall under the enchanted ceiling, as 11-year-olds step forward one by one, the magical hat announces to the entire school who they are, what they will become. "You might belong in Gryffindor," it sings, "where dwell the brave at heart." And there, in that moment, the story begins to narrow. Because bravery is a story worth telling. Because conflict, when born of courage and cunning, makes for excellent chapters. And so as Harry Potter is sorted into Gryffindor and Draco Malfoy into Slytherin, the die is cast. The world of Hogwarts begins to revolve around a two-sided coin, while the other houses fall quietly into the shadows. The problem is not that Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw are ignored entirely, it's that they are rarely explored with the same narrative depth. What do we learn of Hufflepuff beyond a reputation for fairness and loyalty? Cedric Diggory is our sole window into their world, a golden boy whose kindness and strength glow briefly before being extinguished in the graveyard of Little Hangleton. And Ravenclaw? They are the house of intellect, of course, but aside from Luna Lovegood and, to a lesser extent, Cho Chang, we see little of their inner world. Their values, traditions, and struggles remain mostly uncharted territory. J.K. Rowling herself admitted in a 2005 interview that she was perhaps too focused on the Gryffindor-Slytherin conflict. She acknowledged that in doing so, she had shortchanged the other two houses. This was not a small admission. By the time she said it, the damage was done. 7 books were already taking shape, and the final chapters were not about to pivot toward Ernie Macmillan or Terry Boot. Let us talk about Cedric, for he was meant to be Hufflepuff's beacon, a boy described as handsome, modest, and exceptionally talented. Cedric is all that Helga Hufflepuff might have dreamed of. He was fair-minded, as Dumbledore himself says, a fierce friend, a proud son. And yet Cedric's story is not his own. He exists in the shadow of Harry, and his most dramatic moment, his death, serves as a narrative turning point for the protagonist, not for his house. His legacy, poignant though it is, does little to deepen our understanding of what it truly means to be Hufflepuff. Ravenclaw fares only slightly better. Luna Lovegood, with her dreamy eyes and wild beliefs, steals scenes and hearts alike. She is fiercely intelligent, yes, but also kind, courageous, and uniquely herself. And perhaps that's the issue. Luna is less a symbol of Ravenclaw than a symbol of Luna. Her individuality is what defines her, not her house. When we meet the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's ghost, her tragic story of betrayal and death at the hands of the Bloody Baron is moving, but it comes at the very end, a ghost story used to reveal the next clue in Harry's quest. Even Rowena Ravenclaw herself, a founder, is defined more by the diadem she lost and the daughter who betrayed her than by the house she built. Compare this to the flood of detail we receive about Gryffindor and Slytherin. The Gryffindor common room, with its round tower, its scarlet armchairs, and portraits of famous Gryffindors, becomes a second home for readers. We know the fat lady's voice, her eccentricities, and the passwords that guard the entrance. In Slytherin, the dungeon common room is like a greenish, watery cave, and the students within are not just ambitious, they are legacies, carrying names like Malfoy, Zabini, and Nott. Their ideologies, lineages, and politics are unpacked across thousands of pages. But who guards the Hufflepuff common room? What colour are their walls? What songs do they sing? What values do they debate at night beneath the flickering candles? We never know. Helga Hufflepuff herself is a mystery. While Godric, Salazar, and Rowena are drawn in strokes of legend and rivalry, Helga is reduced to a single defining trait: inclusivity. "I'll teach the lot," the Sorting Hat quotes her. Admirable, but hardly evocative. We hear of Zachariah Smith, of course, but only as a coward. Justin Finch Fletchley appears, but his name is longer than his presence. Hannah Abbott is mentioned, Ernie makes a few speeches, and Susan Bones offers a surname that vaguely hints at ministry connections, but none are truly drawn out. They are sketches beside the vivid oil paintings of Weasley, Snape, and Sirius. Cho Chang enters the narrative as a Ravenclaw seeker, beautiful, quiet, graceful. She is Harry's first crush, and her grief over Cedric adds depth, but she is ultimately sidelined, reduced to a romantic subplot with limited resolution. Her friend Marietta Edgecombe betrays the DA, but her motivations are never explored beyond her mother works for the ministry. They are not characters with arcs, they are placeholders with names. Even when Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students step into the limelight, it is often to serve the narrative needs of Gryffindors. Padma Patil is taken to the Yule Ball by Ron, only to be ignored. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw, dates Percy Weasley, But we learn more about Percy's ambition than Penelope's personality. Michael Corner exists mainly as a counterpoint to Ginny's growing independence. It is telling that we don't even learn the entrances to the Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw dormitories until the final books. The Hufflepuff common room, we are told, is near the kitchens and filled with yellow hangings and copper lamps. The password is replaced with tapping on a barrel. Charming, but too little, too late. Ravenclaw's entrance requires answering a riddle, which is a lovely nod to their values, but only mentioned when Harry must pass through. These details appear not as intrinsic parts of the school's fabric, but as auxiliary notes inserted when plot demands it. The sorting itself reinforces this imbalance. To be Gryffindor is to be brave, to be Slytherin is to be ambitious. But Ravenclaw? If you've a ready mind. Hufflepuff? Just and loyal. These feel vague, even passive, as if Ravenclaws merely think and Hufflepuffs merely follow the rules. But bravery and ambition, those drive action. They create conflict, resolution, tension. They give rise to battles, betrayal, redemption.